of time, we can start it immediately, so you can take over.
Okay,
And
just maybe a brief introduction for this session. Just a few minutes, if you could elaborate a little bit on the participants, just few sentences, and I will start with your permission.
Yes. Professor Abi, maybe you can give a brief welcome to all the participants and also give a brief to Dr. Guri about the center and its lecture series.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this webinar. This webinar itself is a part of a series of lectures that we have been organizing on various aspects of science, technology, and innovation policy. By the way, my name is Abhinandan, and I'm the coordinator of the DST Center for Policy Research. It's a project funded by the Department of Science and Technology of the Government of India. And in our center, we have been undertaking research on various aspects of science, technology, and innovation policies. Shagun has been working on STI data architecture and science diplomacy. And we have ongoing programs in studying open science practices as well as rare diseases policies. So those are some of the areas that we have been covering, but there is a steady interest in our center in various aspects of higher education. And it is in this context that we got in touch with Dr. Guri to come and deliver this lecture for us in this policy lecture series. So in terms of the audience, we have a fairly nice mix of students to policymakers from various government agencies. So we have students and postdocs representing academia, faculty members as well representing academia, and we have some participants from the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor in Delhi. So that gives you a good idea about the kind of audience that we have for this event. And of course, with your permission, we will be hosting this recording of this presentation on our YouTube channel. So I hope that would be okay with you.
Okay.
All right, great. So with that, let me extend a very warm welcome to all the participants here, and of course, a very special welcome to Dr. Guri for joining us and accepting our invitation to present this webinar. So Shagun, you want to take over? Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Abhinandan, and thank you, Dr. Guri, and thank you really for joining with this time change difference. And we weren't aware of it; otherwise, we would have alerted our participants also, and you with the reminder. And just to give a little bit of a context, Dr. Guri also represents Israel in the OECD Committee of Science and Technology Policies NESTI working group, which is national experts on science technology indicators, who come together to set agenda and standards for measuring research and innovation for in the national context as well as for the international standard setting for that matters. It is in that context I had the privilege of meeting with him in the last OECD meeting and kindly extended the invite on behalf of our policy center to deliver this lecture, and we are really thankful for him to take this time to address our audience on this topic. And just a bit of a logistics, if there are any questions during the talk, I request the participants to keep raising your hands in the Teams app. Also, you can post these questions in the comment section, which will be taken up immediately after Dr. Guri finishes his talk through the presentation. Over to you, Dr. Guri.
Thank you, Shagun. Just a little bit of background. This presentation will try to put an integrated presentation on prioritizing in R&D and also linked to higher education. I'm serving now with the Council on R&D, on civilian R&D in Israel. It's a national council responsible vis-a-vis the government on formulating R&D policy for the government. We just recently finished an exercise on suggesting for priorities in investing in R&D by government. In the past, I served also in the Council of Higher Education in my country. I was the Director General for the Planning and Budgeting Committee in Israel, which is responsible for the planning and mainly the funding of the system, which is mostly a public system. We have also private institutions, mainly colleges, but still, I mean, most of the basic research is done by universities that are heavily funded by the government. So we'll start with the presentation, and after that, we will open the discussion as you wish. So we will follow the presentation. First of all, the first slide, please, Shagun. The first slide.
Just give me a second. The slide is just keep running.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to load it. I think it's in the flow already. Okay, yeah. Now we could see these slides in its proper format.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
The second slide, please, the following one. Yeah, that's one. First of all, as a macro, on a macro level presentation, we can see the growth of national expenditure on civilian R&D. That I would stress that it doesn't include the military R&D, which is separate in Israel, and it's not considered, of course, civilian, but some of the spillovers are well embedded in the civilian R&D. The second slide, the following slide, we can see that the national expenditure R&D in Israel is very high, and it is almost 5% of our GDP. This is the highest in the world, following by South Korea, which means that Israel has a lot of investment in R&D, either in industry or in basic research. Here we can see that mostly this is the 5%. You can see it's more than 5% civilian R&D, only civilian R&D, in comparison to some of OECD countries. And we see that this is almost more than $20 billion every year. But mostly, if we see the other slide, we can see that we can see we can see that the business R&D and the funds from abroad are the main components of investment of R&D in Israel. We have a lot of multinationals, almost most of the big multinationals, mainly American companies in Israel, mostly for R&D purposes. And that mainly is the most investment in R&D in Israel for the last almost 15 years. We are talking about companies like Microsoft, Google, Meta, every big company or international company. Most of those companies coming to Israel, the employees are Israelis that were, of course, trained in Israel. Some of them came from the army and so on. So we are talking about the multinationals. We are talking about business R&D, that almost 80% of the investment of those 5%, which means that the government is a minor player in this scene, mostly in basic research. When we see that the general government 9.6%, it means that it's mostly to higher education, because this is 0.2% of higher education. That's only donations. So what we count on general government, it mostly funded by the Planning and Budgeting Committee, as I was saying before, and it is allocated by certain formula that I will elaborate it on further on, and that is mainly for basic research or for collaboration between universities and industry and so on. The private non-profit institutions are very small, so we are talking about almost R&D, civilian R&D, mostly controlled by the industry, either from abroad or by Israeli startups and so on. We will go on the next slide, and we'll see how it's how the R&D scene in Israel is constructed. It is not. It is. It evolved from even before statehood. During the British Mandate, 2 or 3 universities in Israel were already established, like the Hebrew University, the Technion in Haifa. So the state started with quite a good base for R&D in Israel, mainly at universities and then in the army. The population was very small at that time. Now we are talking about 10 million in Israel. It's a small country, but it's on the average, it is similar to many European countries, mainly in Western Europe. So we are talking about government R&D that controlled by policy makers in the Ministry of Science, the Ministry of Education, which is responsible for the Council of Higher Education, and mainly by the PBC, what you see, basic research, PBC on the right side, which is the Planning and Budgeting Committee. The Planning and Budgeting Committee is a non-governmental entity which has a power of allocating government funds to universities for teaching and research. In other institutions, we have government R&D by the chief scientist in the Ministry of Innovation, which is controlling or responsible for innovation and dealing mainly with startups in Israel and high-tech companies. We have industrial R&D, and we have defense R&D that is not included in the charts that I was showing you. So we are talking about policy on the right side, on R&D sectors, and budget allocations. So the policy gives us R&D sector and then the budget allocation. The next slide, please. Talking about the basic R&D. Basic R&D is done by the Council of Higher Education and the Planning and Budgeting Committee. The Council of Higher Education is responsible for accreditation, mainly accreditation and quality assurance. And the Planning and Budgeting Committee is responsible for planning and funding the university sector and the colleges sector. So we are talking about 9 research universities, 32 colleges, teacher training colleges, private colleges, and public colleges. So all in all, we have almost more than more than 60, 65 institutions that could considered as independent colleges. Next slide, please. The number of students in Israel grew rapidly since the 90s, with the influx of immigration from the ex-Soviet Union countries and the growth in population. The number of students doubled within less than a decade. And we are talking about today about 300,000 students for the population of 10 million. Sorry?
Okay, please.
So it means that 300,000 students.
So that today we are supposed to come for a discussion.
Pardon, I can't hear you.
Nothing. Somebody unmuted their microphone. I muted them.
Okay. So 300,000 students on 10 million. It's quite a large number. We can see the PhD doctorate, the diploma, the master degree, and the total numbers. As you see, we have also, besides those research universities, we have a big open university, which involves almost 40,000 students. Open universities in the frame of the open universities in the UK. Next slide, please. Talking about funding systems. Funding system for higher education is a very delicate issue because it almost we confront a lot of issues involved that could not be embedded in a good way in one formula. But still, a lot of countries try to tackle this problem by defining two main elements for funding. One is for teaching, and the other one is for research, or rather basic research. Later on, some countries put a lot of emphasis on cultural issues, on social issues, on peripheral issues, and put it into the formula. Here we see some comparison to the formulas. Some of them are highly motivated by outputs, some of them by inputs. Most of the Israeli funding formula are mainly centered on output rather than inputs, and I will elaborate on that later on. Please, next slide. Those components that you can see by suggested formula that is not entirely assimilated into the existing formula, but still we have the teaching formula, the riches formula, the society and economy. Economy, it means that the linkage between industry and academia is very important. Some of those components are in a general formula, and some of them are by earmarked allocations. So we can see that the allocations of higher education or public higher education funding is divided into three, or let's say four components. One is for teaching, one is for basic research, one is for one is earmarked allocations for society and economy. The earmarked allocations are less inclined to input-output formula, and it's a mix of input and output. Next slide, please. So what I was talking about till now was the scenery of the overall R&D seen in Israel, and mainly for the higher education sector. Now going to the Israeli National Council for Research and Development. The National Council of Research and Development is the only national body that combines all elements controlled by government, also policy, for R&D in Israel. So it includes the sector, the higher education sector, the industry sector, and of course the linkage between the industry and academia, and also by government R&D, which is done by specific government entities that has some companies like for oceanographic research, for agricultural research, and so on, which are part of government ministerial. The Israeli Council is dealing with basic research, industrial research, applied research, infrastructure, government research agencies, industry, and others. Please, next slide. The basic formula or gathering of issues in Israel is done by the Frascati manual, which is part of the NESTI and OECD, which does, of course, those of you that are participating in NESTI know that the Frascati is the basic comparison for all countries done by all the OECD. Next slide. Israel does a lot of international collaboration with many countries, mainly with universities. So talking about basic research, it's done mainly
Hello?
Yes, Shagun. I think it's a problem from his end.
His end. Okay, okay. I just got a small heart attack thinking that it is from my end.
No, no, no. I
He
don't see
left
him.
the meeting as well.
Okay, I'll just check with him.
Should be rejoining soon, I suppose. He himself seems to have realized that there was a problem at his end. I don't see his name here.
I'll keep the video just in case if it's. There he is. Hello.
There was a disconnection of the. Can you put the slide again?
Yes. Just give me a second. Yeah, it's there. Please go on.
Okay. So the collaboration of Israeli scientists, mainly from the academia, is done between universities and research centers. Israeli scientists are participating in a lot of international funds like the NSF and the European Union, Horizon. We are, by the way, I think it's the only country that is outside the EEC that is a full member of the European Union Horizon team. It is done, of course, with many countries, including India, China, European countries, and North America, Australia, and so on. We can see it, of course, we do calculations of our publication in Israel, and I will later on speak also on the formula itself, and you will see the components. Next slide, please. So starting with basic research, research is mainly funded by priorities in basic research, competitive funds. We calculate competitive funds that university get, and the government by the PBC allocates external funds as a matching for those funds. Also, we do evaluations of programs and output indicators. The output indicators mainly done in calculating the number of PhDs granting in certain areas and also publications. We were considering putting indicators in patent indicators like the theoretic patents, but it didn't. It is only in discussion now. Next slide, please. So the output, as I said before, the four main major outputs for funding R&D in universities are PhD students, public and private research funds, visiting committees, and bibliometrics. Okay. Next slide. So that's the R&D components.
Just quickly at this stage, Dr. Guri, what is visiting committees, by the way?
Visiting committees, it means that it is quality assurance, actually. Visiting committees of university, quality assurance, and so on.
Thank you.
Beside that, the funding of teaching and research. Teaching is for undergraduate and graduate students, and research, I was saying before. There are earmarked allocations, allocation for infrastructure, which are done also by the PBC and by the Ministry of Science and Innovation, and other ministries like agriculture and energy and so on. We have a form of national research infrastructure, which is a voluntary form that deals with a lot of infrastructure, heavy infrastructure for R&D, civilian as well as industry. In recent years, it was done for nanotechnology, cyber technology, and biotechnology. Those infrastructures are heavily funded by donations as well as by government, and it is mostly built at university campuses. Some of them are in the industry as well, but it's open to industry and other people as well. We have also we are full members in international infrastructure like CERN in Switzerland, in Grenoble and in other infrastructure in Europe. Next slide. So we see that the infrastructure is one of the R&D infrastructure is one of the major basic research as well as industry research, because it combines research, industry, education, universities, innovation, and people as a whole. So infrastructure is a major challenge for a small country like Israel to be able to build its own infrastructure as well as to participate in international infrastructure that is too big for a country in the size of Israel. As I'm saying before, it's like ESFRI, it's like the CERN and it's like in the institutions in Grenoble, in Europe, mainly in Europe, but we are doing also collaborations with Jordan now. There is a synchrotron in Jordan, and also one is the Sesame, what we call is the Sesame project, and some of them are also done with the United States. Next slide, please. So this is the form that we can see. You can put another. We can see the spread of infrastructure all over Europe that Israel is a full participant, mainly in Grenoble and CERN, as I'm saying before. So we're talking about basic research, industrial research, and now I would like to elaborate a little bit on the Magnet program, which combines industry and academia together. It is done by the Innovation Authority, which funding newly programs mainly by startups, combining a knowledge from university with a lot of implemented research in industry. We can see also in each of our research universities, some of our colleges as well, constructed companies that do the university technology transfer to maybe in collaboration with the industry. Some of them doing it in startups, starting at the university, and then they sell it to other companies. Some of those are in the areas of electronics, in cybersecurity, in biotech. Some of them are in the pharmaceutical industry, and that generates a lot of knowledge to universities and industry as well, and collaboration with international institutions. The main so the linkage between universities and industry are trying to encourage universities to be involved in market-driven issues and translating basic research into practical outputs. Of course, that involves a lot of IP policy because intellectual property issues are very complicated with a lot of legal issues. But the government or universities are trying to register a lot of their IPs, and it is a well I would say, a well inclined industry to generate a lot of funds from industry to universities. So we were talking about basic research, industrial research, and there is another element of government research. Government research is very small in Israel in comparison to, I think, other countries, even in Europe. It is done by government companies in the areas of agriculture, oceanography and environment, geology and earth sciences, social sciences and public safety, and some of them are in transportation. It started as a major, I would say, R&D phenomena that started Israel from the government, a very centralized government that dealt in the beginning of the 50s and then 60s as a government focus for the future, that the government can do better research than any other institution. But then things were changing, and market-driven economy replaced centralized thinking, and we began to see a decline in a lot of government entities that were dealing with basic research or industrial research that is not done. Today, our country is trying to see the mixture between those elements, as I was saying before, industry, academia, government, and also the spillovers from the military to the civilian R&D. Next slide. If you want to see the thinking of our council as we look forward, how to generate a general formula for constructing a combined policy for R&D, it is very difficult because there are a lot of players. But still, I mean, on the level of policy, we can do it. On level of policy, the government can do it, and that's what we done just lately by trying to combine a lot of those elements in R&D in our country into a priority set of recommendations that I will show you now. Next slide. Just lately, the NCRD, the National Council on R&D in Israel, set a committee by request of the government and for recommending for the government on prioritization in R&D and investment in R&D by the government. There was 5 stages of this committee. We started with a survey. After the survey, the process, you can read it afterwards. We gathered a lot of information. We examined 14 areas of R&D topics and ranked them by criteria that we set. And then we choose, we were only 5 were chosen and recommended to the government. Next slide. Those were the criteria that were selected for priority areas, mainly to see if there are linkage between industry and academia. Where is the lack of the involvement of the industry? If some of those areas are well maintained by the industry, the government should not involve. So only those areas that are not well controlled by the industry or are on a startup stage should be considered as those who will be selected. Next slide. Those were the 14 priority areas and the areas that were calculated on those criteria that I shown before, and we choose 5 areas that are on next slide, I think, or those are the 5 areas that were chosen: bioconvergence, food tech, blue tech, also the sea tech and agri-tech and the seafood and so on. Civilian space industry, and renewable energy and energy storage. The civilian space industry is a small industry in Israel, although Israel is considered one of the leading countries in space industry, but it's done mainly by the military. So the spillover for civilian space industry should be encouraged by government. We have a lot of startups, and we are trying, because Israel is one of the 7 or 8 countries, including India, of course, that can manufacture, launch, and survey the satellites in space. But the civilian area is lacking from development, that it could, of course, develop much more than it is already done. So we recommend it for more funding from government. So I think that's will sum up the Israeli R&D scenery, which combines industry, which combines government, which combines spillovers from the military, and of course the involvement of universities in Israel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guri. I think that was very, very informative in terms of the flow and the content. I now request our participants, if they have any questions or comments or something to pose as a discussion pointer, feel free to either raise your team's hand, or maybe you can put it here or directly intervene. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Ketki Bapat, she is a senior scientist from the Office of Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. Over to you, Dr. Bapat.
Thank you, Professor Guri. It was excellent and very, very crisp and with clarity you have presented, and we got the glimpses of the complete procedure in a brief way. So my 2 things are there here. Very beautifully, you have had the ecosystem of the establishing the scientific centers for your civilians as well as for industry. Now at the university campuses, as I'm understanding. So how they are running cost, and how it is being borne by whether it is government, or because sometimes it is an industry driven project or something, it may not lead the product as you envisaged or so. So how it is running, that is my first question. Second question, sir, can I ask some 2-3 questions or one by one? Which way you will be comfortable, sir?
Well, I could. The first question was on industry, funded by government, or what was that?
No, okay, I'll ask one by one. See, as I understood from your presentation, that government has actually established some centers for research centers where civilians as well.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think there is an interruption. She has also written it here. I'll rephrase what she is trying to say. The infrastructure that are created, I think it is coming from the research infrastructure presentation slide that you had, created in Israel, and also you highlighted how it is challenging for a country like Israel to maintain a large infrastructure for scientific research. And in terms of maintenance, does it only take government support or also industry intervene to maintain the scientific infrastructure in institutions? That's the question.
Okay, so I answer one by one, if it's possible. You are talking about infrastructure, yeah? It is not done only by government. There is a lot. For instance, if we are taking most of those infrastructures that I was talking about are at university campuses. University campuses or research university in Israel are heavily funded by donations as well. Okay, by donation and by grants from international research funds. For instance, if the NIH or NSF or the Horizon in Europe will give the university a grant, it will help to maintain those infrastructure. The maintenance of infrastructures are very crucial. Are very crucial because you can establish or build an infrastructure and then you cannot maintain it. That's a big problem, of course, and that's the main reason when we establish an infrastructure or university has an initiative to establish an infrastructure and it comes to the planning and budgeting committee and ask for support. We, of course, the PBC or the Planning and Budgeting Committee should see if it can be maintained on the long run.
Yeah. One more question for you. In the combined model, you have said that your R&D or your committee also boosts the traditional industry, one of the point. And sometimes in the certain cases where the empowering the traditional knowledge, some R&D may be required, which may not have the economical benefit, but certainly upliftment of the social sector may be, may be accomplished. So whether this kind of a thing where no economic benefit is there, means that industry benefit also, whether such kind of a R&D also is considered for government support.
So you mean that the question, if I could not hear all the question, but I think that the you were talking about. I mean, in Israel there is a dual system. Dual system means that there is a big difference between research universities and other institutions of higher education. So the formula that I was talking about that involves all those components on PhDs and so on are only applicable to research universities. They are not applicable to colleges. So that's mostly for those 9 or 10 universities that are heavily funded by the government. Other colleges are funded only for teaching because they are not allowed. By the way, they are not allowed to have PhD programs. So that I'm not. If you are familiar with the British system that went from a dual system to the existing system, they had the polytechnics and then they had the research universities, and there was a big differences between them, but now they are considering them all as universities. In Israel, we are still maintaining the dual system. We're still maintaining the dual system. So the research components are only for universities. This is also challenged by some of our colleges, and now we are considering putting small elements of research to colleges as well.
Yes.
So that was the question in
Yeah.
general.
I think this one part, the later part of her question, in addition to what you're saying, is many a times research is seen from its economic benefit. So is there focus to fund research which might not have economic benefit, but social benefit, some form of social development, but not economic development?
Oh, right. I forgot that. The formula is mainly on basic research, which has nothing to do with industry, but has to do with basic research. Social elements are not considered in the existing formula, but it is funded by earmarked allocations, specific allocations by the PBC, not by the general formula, but by the other components that are earmarked formulas that are done each year in separate. For instance, encouraging students to go from the central region to the northern region, which are less developed and so on, and they give them more allocation and so on. The basic research is also considered for things that are not, you don't see it's a basic research. It has nothing to do with industry. Most of the funds for universities for research has no linkage to industry. So this is basic research as it considered for many years. But of course, there are a lot of pressure from the public to encourage universities to be more inclined to industry needs. And that's why each university in Israel established a company that deals with transferring knowledge from academia to industry. And they are doing that sometimes on a business basis discussions, and then that generates some funds for university as well.
Thank you so much. I think
Thank
that
you.
answers Dr.
Thank you.
Bapat's question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Next, we have Professor Subbaiah Arnachalam, who is a visiting professor at our policy center and also been associated with many other organizations. And he has also written papers on scientometric studies, also comparative studies with Israel, particularly on superconductivity research, physics, and biology. Professor Arnachalam, your question, please. Professor, you're muted. Professor Arnachalam?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All research requires a lot of information, both to carry out the research and then once the research is carried out, to make the research information available to other researchers and the community as a whole. And that's why India, for example, we have set up institutions in the olden days like IISc or different information centers and so on. How do you handle this major aspect of research in Israel? Especially after it is published, research is published, how do you make the research knowledge freely and openly available to the people of Israel and the rest of the world? Right now, most of your scientists publish in professional journals, most of which are pretty expensive for people to afford. So how do you handle this major issue of information in research?
Could you?
Yes,
I couldn't.
Dr. Guri, if I rephrase or maybe shorten what Professor Arunachalam was trying to say, the research, scholarly scientific research that is produced and published in peer-reviewed journals, which are mostly published in high paywalled, high reputed journals, which is very accessibility-wise, it's highly expensive for people to have access to. In terms of making the scientific knowledge openly available, how does Israel manage in terms of open access to scientific knowledge?
Okay. I think, I mean, open access, there was a committee, I'm not very familiar with, there was a committee that I think also at the OECD that talks about open access for publications. I think still Israel is most of the scientists are not on open access. I'm not very sure what will be the development of that. I think it should be done by if the OECD will recommend an open access as a major policy, it will include Israel as well.
Thank you, Dr. Guri. Professor Arunachalam, do you have any more comments?
Let others ask. If the time permits, I'll come at the end.
Sure. Thank you, Professor. Next, we have Dr. Chetan, who is a faculty member in the School of Social Sciences in a private university close to the institute where we are sitting. It's called Ramaiah University. Chetan is also an expert in public policy in higher education, helping the government draft policies on that. Chetan, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shagun. Thank you, Dr. Guri, for that overview, because this is really very timely, because just recently the government of India has finalized the national education policy after 3.5 decades of gap. So I was associated very closely with that, with Dr. Kasur and the committee. So there is a recommendation. One of the major recommendation is to revisit the current higher education ecosystem to what you said about research intensive university, teaching intensive university, and degree awarding autonomous college. So in that context, I was just curious to know, because in our discussions, we had studied various countries' models. And of course, it was a good reference to this Israel's model also. But there, what we see in terms of learning, currently when we're implementing it, teaching intensive universities are also going to engage with PhDs. Because they are, by virtue of being universities, supposed to offer all degrees. But in Israel's case, you referred that PhDs are exclusive for research universities. So how this reconciliation could be feasible, because of the number surely that we have, and PhDs being now very critical. So how do you see this relationship? Like in Israel, is teaching institutions completely isolated from research universities, or are they interrelated at any point of time? That is one question, part one. Part two of the same line of thought is, giving this Indian context that we are also aligned to the British system and now moving to this model, how do you see this evolving? This is my first question, largely, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a very complex issue. I mean, it's what we did in the past. I mean, when there was a need for more research, we established another university. So we started with 2 universities in the establishment of Israel. Now we have 10. There is a saying. I mean, it's not scientific, but for each 1 million people, you need one research university. So we are reaching the 10th university in the north that the government decided just a few months ago to establish another university in the north. So it will upgrade. Of course, one of the colleges or few of the colleges, they will be combined and will establish another research university. But still, the dual system will maintain itself. But then, of course, there are social issues. Social issues, they're saying, why we are lacking PhDs in certain territories in the country. but still we are a very small country. I mean, the length from north to south is 500 kilometers. So it's everything is reachable. And still, I mean, the issue is not only on PhDs, but the issue is also for the development and the maturity of the staff teaching at colleges. They need to be involved in research. You're absolutely right. They still have to do research, publication, and so on. And that was done by. I mean, there is we have a lot of collective bargaining agreements with our senior academic staff, and those collective bargaining agreements are are involving issues like teaching load. Okay, the teaching load at universities is very small, and the teaching load at colleges are almost double. So what they did in recent years, they lowered the teaching load on senior staff at colleges, and they were able to involve in research, but not in research that involves heavy infrastructure and so on, but like publication, mostly in social sciences. If you analyze the areas that colleges in Israel teach, they are mostly in social sciences, in health sciences, and so on. They are not in physics and heavily funded infrastructure elements like physics and electronics and so on. So this is an issue that I think involves a lot of countries. I don't know. I mean, it will be challenged in next years. Our solution is still to maintain the dual system and to encourage establishing another university if it's possible.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chetan. Next, we have Professor Sai Baba. Professor Sai Baba is also associated with the same university where Chetan is coming from, and also he is a policy expert. He also shaped human resources for one of our strategic departments in Government of India for a very long time before he moved on to academics again. I hand it over to Professor Sai Baba.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shagun. Thank you, Dr. Guy. Nice listening to you. But my thinking is the way you explained in the Israel system is that a lot of foreign players are there. The funding comes from the industry, which are from outside, and also the less contribution from the government. So my worry is that how do the policy is being played in higher education when it comes to long-term prospects for research? You know, today what would happen is the industry invests for looking for immediate returns, not very long-term returns. So do we face such an issue? And my other question is that what are the number of percentage of students who are there from Israel vis-a-vis outside Israel? Because you have a lot of collaborations from different countries.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think that well, I mean, the government in Israel was, I mean, there was, it's still, I mean, many governments are relying on that the universities in Israel that was established mostly not by government, yeah, but they are by private initiatives, can bring a lot of donations and a lot of funds from outside. But then that brings us to a big issue, not only on the formula that the funding formula for higher education for basic research, but the amount of money that should be allocated. It depends if you have, for instance, a certain amount of money that the government gives you. That's the case now. And then the Planning and Budgeting Committee just allocates this money. But the overall money maybe is not sufficient enough. It's not sufficient enough. And that makes it a problem. So what we did, there was two committees in the last decade that I was involved that was trying to set the amount of money that the higher education research needs. But then the government, mainly the Ministry of Finance, it was, of course, this is a kind of a negotiation with the Ministry of Finance, and we say that we need another, let's say, 1 billion Israeli shekels, the local currency, for funds, and then they didn't get it. But still, I mean, one of the only, I would say, the only areas that are funded in Israel on a long-term basis, and in a long-term agreement with the government, is the higher education sector. It's usually for 4 or 5 year agreement. This is the only one besides the military that has also a long-term agreement. So this is the only areas in Israel that is funded on a long-term basis. Although, of course, the national budget should be approved each year, but the agreement is there, and it is backed by the Ministry of Finance. So it gives some kind of good relation. I think to your question about students, and we have, by the way, Israel has a tuition fee. It's a general tuition fee for colleges and universities. It is only at university, it is between 10, 15, sometimes 30% of the income of university. So it's not it is essential, but it's not the major funding element. The Israeli government wanted to encourage collaboration with other countries, mainly not on the undergraduate or the graduate, but more on the PhD. We have a lot of connections with other countries, of course, with India as well. A lot of, I think, postdoctoral and from India in Israel in basic research are involved. There are also, I think, there are also agreement with the Indian government on research funds done in India and Israel, and with collaboration with scientists from each country. The main country, I think, still that is on an individual basis is the United States. On a national basis is with the EEC on the horizon. I think it's with India. It's growing rapidly. We have some with China. And with other countries, with South Korea and so on. But on a national agreements, I think it is only few countries, including India and other countries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Momita Kole, my colleague from the Policy Center here. She works on the open access and open science policies. Momita?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Shagun, and thanks, Dr. Gurry, for such an elaborate presentation. We really got to know a lot about Israeli higher education system and funding. So my question comes is that, as you mentioned, that you have a formula for the funding, and one of the indicator was a bibliometric. So how do you use, so is it based on the number, like number of publication, or how do you assess the quality of publication? Because this is something which in India we always face. So number can be any number of publication, but there is always a question quality. So do you have any comment on it? How do you assess the quality?
I think the formula uses the impact factor. We use the impact factor on publications. It is done each year, and then we calculate it on a 3-year average of the last 3 years and allocates the funds accordingly. Publications are almost, it's about 30% of the formula. The publication
So that's a huge.
Yeah, 30% is huge. It's disputable. You're right. It used to be 15%. Now it's 30%, and there are a lot of universities that challenge that, and they said it's too much. You have to put more in other areas. So it's done mainly by impact factor.
I just have a follow-up question, sorry, if I may. Thank you. So as also you said that another indicator would be the PhD students, assuming that is the number of students graduating. So there also, is it just based on the number, or is there any kind of quality measure on the quality of the PhD thesis or something is also been considered?
Well, that's a very good question. Because I mean we don't consider quality, because as far as the visiting committees and the accreditation authorities granted a university an autonomous, for instance, PhD or graduate studies, it is considered the same in each university that was granted that. So we don't calculate quality, because it's considered qualified for giving those degrees in the beginning after they got their accreditation. But then, I mean, only what I didn't mention, that the funding on teaching of those students are not given by the number of students. They're given by number of predicted graduates. So it's a bit of a complex formula that forecast the number of graduates that will end. For instance, if in certain area, let's say physics, will start in certain university 100 students. They should, I mean, in full-time terms, they should end after 3 years, because the undergraduate studies at physics in Israel is 3 years, like in England. So if 3 years, you don't finish it at 3 years, for instance, only 70 will graduate out of those 100 after 3 years. So the university will get only 70 for 70 graduates, not for 100 graduates. So that's a complex formula that gives incentives to universities to boost their graduates in relations to time. But then they are, of course, talking about that what a university, if they will speed up the graduates, and they will lower the standard of teaching. But then, of course, if they will do that, I mean, the visiting committee can take the Council of Higher Education in Israel can take the accreditation authority from the university. Okay, they can take it out. I mean, in recent years, 2 colleges in Israel were closed because of lack of mainly private institutions. That's an issue that I didn't talk about. I'm a connection with there's an institution in SUNY Albany that does a lot of research on privatization in higher education. That's a big issue. In Israel, it's only, I would say, 12 to 15% of the students are in private institutions. They are mainly at undergraduate level within private colleges. But last year, one of the colleges were granting a university status. So that makes it a little bit complex. So the equilibrium between quality and quantity is still there. It's not fully solved.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gari. Thanks for your.
Thank you, Momita. We have a last set of questions. I request Professor Abhinandanan to post his comment/questions.
Yeah. Dr. Guri, thanks a lot for this really nice lecture. My question is about the 9 public universities in Israel. Is there a sense among the universities that the inequality in terms of funding has been increasing over the years? And if so, I mean, is there some sort of a concern among the academics there about such inequality? Because whenever you introduce certain metrics for funding, this sort of inequality will definitely come into the picture. And is there a sense that this inequality is increasing over time?
Sorry, I did. What do you mean by inequality between
in funding, in public funding? I'm only talking about the universities, the 9 universities that you have in Israel. So over the years, let us take the top 3 universities and the bottom 3 universities in terms of the amount of funding that they receive, public funding that they receive from the government. Is the difference between the 2 sets increasing or decreasing over time? And is there a concern?
That's a very good question, because I'm not sure if I have the right answer for that, but I think that still those very old universities that were established even before the state was established. I mean, for instance, you see, I mean, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem was established in the 20s, 1920 something, and one of the founding fathers was Einstein, Albert Einstein. And they still maintain the highest level of teaching in Israel, mainly because of prestige and quality of teachers and so on. And of course, there are a lot of discussion about this issue, about this very important issue that you're saying before, the discrepancy between good universities and less. And so, of course, if you are good, you get a lot of money. If you're less good, and then you cannot bridge the gap. And that's a good issue. But then in Israel, up to the 1990s, before the influx of immigrants from the Soviet Union, we had a lot of differences between universities. That I can say. I don't have the exact numbers, but I think that the gap is smaller than it used to be, because small universities in the south and in the north, in Haifa and in Beersheba, that were very small with a few students, grew rapidly, and the government under the government by the PBC, the Planning and Budgeting Committee, set a program to allocate more students to those less endowed universities, like in the south and the north. So they grew rapidly, and the other universities, like the Hebrew University or Tel Aviv University, didn't grow. So the funding increased to those universities by either by the number of students or by the number of research staff that came there. So I think the gap is less than it used to be in the past.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But this is because by your question, but this is because of external elements that
Right.
has nothing to do with government, because of the influx of immigrants and so on. But this is like an ex machina. It has nothing to do with the government. It was a must. But then channeling those students to the south and to the north, this was a government decision.
And that has resulted in some sort of a narrowing down of the differences in research output as well.
It narrowed down the research elements, but then in the south they are establishing now a cyber within the Ben Gurion University, which is in the south. They're establishing a cyber park by the government, which is linked, of course, to the university, and that will boost more. They affiliated the hospital to the university. That's more. But then we should mind that those old universities they are not keeping they're not staying still. They're still growing as well.
Of course, yeah.
So I think it's narrowing, but it is not going to be as the same as in the center as the old universities. But we can see it almost in any other countries. I suppose in India you would see this also. I mean, between the national universities, the well-known universities in the world from India, and in the rural areas, and that's a big social problem. Big social problems that should be tackled also by the Council of Higher Education, but mainly by government that will direct the Council of Higher Education in the right direction for narrowing the gaps.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor Abhinandan. We'll take a final question, and if there are any final thoughts in this round, we'll also take it through the comments. Professor Arnachalam, for your other questions. Professor Arnachalam, I think your screen is muted.
Right now, the whole world is moving away from professional journals as a means of, or the primary means of communication of scholarship and science. And they seem to prefer going over to preprints or refereed preprints and so on. What is the trend among Israeli academics and other researchers in research performing institutions?
You were disconnected.
Okay. Professor, if I may rephrase the question, what Professor Arnachalam asked, the global trend on publishing in preprints and other means of getting the scientific output reaching the scientists in the community. What is the trend followed among the academics and researchers in Israel now recently, in recent times?
By publication? You mean by publication?
Yeah. What are the popular mode of communicating their scientific output? Is it through preprints, or is there any popular understanding or opinion that the Israeli academics have? Is that right, Professor Arnachalam? Am I posing it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand the question. I'm not sure if I have the right answer or the exact answer on that, but I think it's not on printed. It's all over. I think it's all electronic. If I understood correctly your question.
It's all electronic, but we are spending a lot of money on publishing them in journals which are expensive. Instead, the world is now moving towards what are called preprints or archiving or repositories and so on, where the overall cost will be less and the money can be used for useful purposes of research. Are you trying to save your research money in Israel entirely for research, or you are also spending money on publishing in journals and so on, like most of us are doing in the rest of the world?
I don't think I mean, in the formula, there is no differences between that. I mean, they don't calculate that. I mean, I don't think there is an economist or something. I'm not familiar with this issue very much, but I don't think there is a difference between the two. In funding, I mean, if you mean in funding.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Not really. We will take it up by correspondence.
Yes, I will also connect you via email, Dr. Guri. I think Professor Arunachalam is directing his question towards how the publication outputs are not getting stuck behind the paywall system of commercial publishing, and are they preferring any other means of putting their scientific output, peer-reviewed publications in preprint archives and in other repositories. I'll certainly connect both of you, and then this conversation can be taken.
That will be, and I will try to answer more on an elaborated on the email.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. We have a last question from my colleague, Dr. Radhika Trikka. She works on industry academia interaction for the Department of Science and Technology in Delhi. Radhika?
Thanks, Shagun, and thanks, Guri, for your wonderful talk. So my question is regarding the Magneton program. So this is one of the fabulous example of industry academia support that is carried out, supported by the government itself. So while we were reading about the Magneton program, it is partially open for the non-Israeli entities also. So my first question is how you see non-Israeli companies or entities they can participate in Magneton program, and what is the extent they do receive the funding support and other kinds of support also in that. That is my first question, how it is going to open to the world. And the second question is about the Centers for the Industrial Revolution that has been established in the Israel that keeps government's regulation updated according to the industrial changes that are happening. So more of you can give a little bit aspect of how the governance of these centers happen. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What centers can you?
Can I rephrase and present? She asked for two questions. One is on the Magneton program or being open to non-Israeli business entities. How do you see this open to the world approach towards attracting the industrial commercial entities who are non-Israelis to academic collaboration? That's the first question. Second question I'll ask after this.
Okay, the Magneton is a very well known, but it's done by the Innovation Authority. We are not very involved. I'm myself not very involved in their policy, but I think it was mainly to encourage the local industry. But I think that when you talk about local industry, a lot of local industry, as I was saying before, is funded heavily by international other industries. So it's in indirectly they're collaborating with international also. That's my main observation. I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I don't have exact answer for that, but it should be considered by the Innovation Authority. But the main Magneton was to encourage those companies in Israel, but still the companies themselves are involved with other companies in other countries indirectly.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting model. I think Radhika would probably connect more on that, because this is like indirectly internationally linked, internationalizing the industrial R&D within the Israeli ecosystem through funding in industries. So Radhika will certainly take up this with you separately. The second question that she asked was the Centers of Excellence for Industrial Revolution, which Israel has started, and it was not more of a question. I think kind of your observation on how these centers are being supported and promoted within the Israeli ecosystem. Is that right, Radhika?
The excellence. What do you mean by excellence?
There are specific centers created for industrial revolution. Is that right, Radhika? Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, so these are quite new centers that have been set up, directly promoted by government, just to update the regulations and the policies of the Israeli government in tune with the industrial development, technological developments that are happening. I just wanted to know more of the governance, because it's quite a new concept and how they are being set up into an Israeli ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, if you have any information on these new developments that are happening, if not through email also, we could correspond, and I can ask her to drop an email for that.
That's what we will do. Yeah, I will try to answer that
Via email. Yeah. That sounds good. Radhika, if you find, because you're saying this is a recent development, if you find any relevant document or a link which talks about it, we can relay it to Dr. Guri and ask for more information later.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Guri, for patiently answering all our questions. I hope there are no other comments or questions to be posed, and also we are well past our scheduled time in the Indian time zone. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you personally for, first of all, making this timing mismatch arrangements and making yourself available 1 hour earlier to appear in front of our audience and give this very informative talk and also engage in this conversation. And of course, some of the questions are heavily loaded, which you certainly answered to the best of its potential to give information. And we will certainly connect with some of the specific questions that are asked through via email. And I also thank all of our participants who took time to join this conversation, particularly colleagues from Ramya University, Professor Sai Baba, Dr. Chetan, and the students from the public policy program there, and my policy colleague from the center and other places, and also from the Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, we had colleagues joining, and the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research. We also have Dr. Alok Goel, who administers master's program in science and technology, communication and policy, who is also here in the audience. So I thank all of them and all other who joined to engage in this lecture and in conversation. And thank you so much to Professor Abhinandanan for facilitating this dialogue between us. And we strive to engage furthermore with you through a partnership in conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shagun. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for me to participate in such a illuminating discussion, and I hope that we will connect in the future on more issues that will come in the future. Thank you very much.
Most certainly. Thank you so much. Professor Abhi, you have any final words?
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay.
Bye.
I was just saying thank you and bye. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.